I am Liam. I am 32 years old. 7 years ago, my own father, a ruthless Wall Street CEO, threw me out of his mansion in the dead of winter with absolutely nothing to my name. While I was standing on his freezing driveway, wondering how I was going to survive the night, he looked me dead in the eye and said my life was a complete waste and I would never amount to a single thing. He literally laughed alongside his executives as the heavy oak doors slammed in my face, cutting me off from my family forever. But there is one thing he did not know. The massive financial empire he had spent his entire life building was quietly crumbling. And the anonymous billionaire he was currently begging to save him from absolute ruin was me. And tonight he was going to find out the hard way. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled his world piece by piece, hit that like button if you believe that karma always comes to collect. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Now, let us go back to where the hammer finally fell. I stood outside the Skyline Sovereign Club on Christmas Eve, watching my breath turn to frost in the bitter New York air. The wind coming off Central Park was brutal, cutting right through my coat, but I barely felt it. My blood was running hot with a quiet, calculated anticipation. It had been 7 long years since I had set foot in a room with my family. 7 years since I had heard my mother's voice. 7 years since my father told me my existence was a disappointment wrapped in skin. And now here I was. I was wearing a simple, off-the-rack dark suit that I could have purchased at any mid-tier department store like Macy's. I carried a standard leather wallet that probably cost less than the imported caviar they were serving inside. I dressed this way entirely on purpose. I wanted them to see exactly what they expected to see. I wanted to know if anything had changed, or if they would still look at me the way they always had, like I was a stain on their perfect, wealthy family portrait. The doorman, a towering man in a gold-braided uniform, nodded as I approached. He asked for my name. When I gave it, his eyes remained perfectly blank. He did not recognize me. Why would he? To the high society world of Manhattan, Liam Holloway was a complete nobody. I was a ghost who had vanished from their gilded halls and never returned. But I knew a secret that was about to shake this building to its foundation. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped into a lobby dripping with crystal chandeliers and the heavy scent of old money, expensive pine, and expensive perfume. A string quartet played holiday standards somewhere in the distance. Waiters in crisp white jackets carried silver trays of vintage champagne. This was my father's world. This was the world of banking dynasties and corporate titans, where a person's worth was measured entirely by their real estate portfolio, their inheritance, and their annual salary. The maitre d' led me through a maze of private dining rooms, his polished shoes making zero noise on the thick carpets. We finally reached the massive double doors reserved for the Holloway family Christmas dinner. I paused at the entrance, steadying my breathing. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see the shapes of people moving. I could hear the low, commanding rumble of my father's voice echoing over the polite laughter. Arthur Holloway, CEO of Holloway Securities. A man who had built an empire on other people's money and his own unshakable belief that he was a god among men. I opened the door. The heavy wood groaned slightly. The conversation stopped immediately. Every single head in the room turned to face me. My mother, Margaret, sat frozen at the table with a crystal wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. She looked older, her face tight with years of suppressed anxiety. My older brother, Julian, stood near the floor-to-ceiling window. His face instantly cycled through shock, deep guilt, and a strange kind of panic. His wife, Clara, pressed her hand against her chest like a woman watching a car accident unfold in slow motion. And there, sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, was my father. He looked slightly older than I remembered. The silver in his hair had spread, and deeper lines carved grooves around his mouth. But his eyes were exactly the same. They were cold, calculating, measuring everyone against a standard only he understood. Liam. He said my name like it was a bad stock investment he was legally forced to acknowledge. You actually came. You invited me, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I thought perhaps time had taught you something. He scoffed softly and gestured to an empty chair at the absolute far end of the table. It was as far away from him as physically possible without sitting in the hallway. Sit. We were just discussing the new partnership with Reed Capital. Important business. Try to keep up. I took my seat without another word. A waiter instantly appeared at my elbow offering a flute of champagne. I accepted it, though I did not take a sip. I needed my mind razor-sharp tonight. The conversation quickly resumed, flowing entirely around me. My father spoke at length about his brilliant strategies, his inevitable success, his grand legacy. The other guests were business associates and family friends who had known me since childhood. They nodded along like synchronized puppets. Not a single person asked where I had been. Not one asked how I was doing. I was nothing more than furniture. 30 minutes into the meal, the main course was cleared. My father set down his knife and fork with deliberate precision. He dabbed his linen napkin against his lips and turned his gaze directly toward me. "So, Liam," his voice carried across the room, silencing every other conversation instantly. "I have to ask, are you still scrubbing toilets to pay your rent? Or have you finally found a real job?" The question was a precision strike. It was designed to humiliate me in front of his peers. He knew exactly what buttons to push. "I am doing fine, Arthur," I replied quietly, refusing to grant him the title of dad. "Fine." He repeated the word with a sickening smirk. Fine is what mediocre people say when they have absolutely nothing to show for themselves. He glanced around the table, making sure his audience was paying close attention. "Do you know what I was worth at your age, Liam? I had already made my first 10 million. I was sitting on 3 corporate boards. I was building a legacy for this family. What do you have to show for 32 years of life? A rented apartment somewhere in the dirty boroughs? A used car that barely starts in the morning?" I felt the familiar heat rising in my chest. The old anger. The heavy, suffocating shame. For a split second, I was 24 years old again, standing in his study while he tore my dignity to shreds. But I was not 24 anymore. I was armed. "I have enough," I said clearly. My father laughed loudly. It was an ugly, scraping sound that echoed off the high ceiling. "Enough. Listen to him, everyone. He has enough. Do you know what the difference is between people who have enough and people who run the world? Drive. The willingness to crush whatever stands in your way. You never had it. You are soft. Arthur, please." My mother's voice was barely a whisper from across the table. "Perhaps this is not the time." "No, Margaret, this is exactly the time," he snapped, fixing me with a dead, shark-like stare. "I invited you here tonight because I wanted to give you one more chance to look at this room, look at your empty wallet, and admit that I was right. You should have joined the company. You should have learned your place under your brother. Instead, you threw your inheritance away for some ridiculous dream about math and computers." The table was dead silent. I could feel the weight of their judgment. I could feel their quiet satisfaction at watching Arthur Holloway put his stray dog of a son back in his place. I set down my napkin. I met my father's gaze. I did not break eye contact. I did not flinch. I just smiled. It was a very small smile, but I saw a flicker of genuine uncertainty cross his face. He expected me to crumble. He expected an apology. He had no idea that the banking partner he was so desperate to impress, Richard Vance, was sitting 3 seats away, fully aware of exactly who I was. He did not know that the massive algorithmic trading fund he was currently begging for a lifeline was mine. I lifted my glass. The trap was set. But to understand how beautiful this execution was going to be, you have to understand the hell I crawled out of to build it. I thought the worst was over when I left home. I was so incredibly wrong. I grew up in a house that looked like a museum and felt like a maximum security prison. The Holloway estate sat on 12 manicured acres in Greenwich, Connecticut. It had 23 rooms, a massive staff, and enough antique furniture to fund a small country. From the outside, looking through the wrought iron gates, it was the absolute pinnacle of the American dream. Inside, it was an emotional wasteland where affection was treated as a weakness. My earliest memories are of crushing silence. My mother, Margaret, moved through the massive house like a well-dressed ghost. She spent her days organizing charity galas and attending HOA meetings for the ultra-rich. She never raised her voice. She never complained. She existed in the margins of my father's life, grateful for whatever tiny scraps of attention he threw her way. She traded her voice for financial security long before I was born. She had her credit cards, her designer clothes, and her pristine reputation. She was terrified of losing it. My older brother, Julian, was the golden child. From the exact moment Julian took his first breath, my father claimed him. Julian was the heir. Julian would carry the family name. Julian would become everything Arthur Holloway demanded. And me? I was the spare. I was the backup plan that was never needed. The favoritism was not hidden. It was weaponized daily. I remember my brother's 16th birthday like it happened yesterday. I walked out of the front door to go to school, and parked in the circular driveway was a brand new Porsche 911. It was sleek, silver, and had a giant red ribbon tied to the roof. My father threw a massive catered party that weekend. He invited half of Wall Street to celebrate his perfect son. There was a jazz band on the lawn. There were ice sculptures. When I turned 16 2 years later, my father completely forgot. There was no party. There was no car. He flew to London for a business trip and did not even call. The only person who remembered was Thomas, our elderly butler. Thomas sneaked a slice of chocolate cake from the kitchen into my room after midnight. My mother handed me a card the next morning before she left for the country club. It had a $100 bill inside. She looked away, too ashamed to even speak to me. I learned to survive by becoming invisible. I stayed in my room and buried myself in mathematics. I was fascinated by patterns, by the hidden logic that governed everything from weather systems to the stock market. While Julian spent his summers interning at Holloway Securities, being groomed for greatness, and shaking hands with state senators, I was told to stay out of sight during family gatherings. My presence was an inconvenience to my father's perfect narrative. The absolute breaking point happened on a cold Tuesday in March, shortly after my 24th birthday. I had just finished my master's degree in computational mathematics from Stanford. I graduated with top honors. My thesis on predictive market modeling was actually being published in 3 major academic journals. For the first time in my entire life, I thought I had built something undeniably impressive. Something even Arthur Holloway could not ignore or brush aside. I flew back to Greenwich because my mother called me. She told me my father wanted to discuss my future. She made it sound like he was finally ready to welcome me to the table as an equal. I walked into his massive oak-paneled study with my head held high. Julian was sitting in a plush leather chair. Nathaniel, my father's sneering right-hand man, leaned casually against the bookshelf. My mother sat nervously on a sofa near the window, clutching her purse. Nobody stood to greet me. "I have a proposal," my father began. He skipped any sort of greeting or congratulations on my degree. "Holloway Securities is expanding our digital infrastructure. We need someone with technical expertise to oversee the transition. Julian suggested you might be useful." I looked at my brother. Julian gave me a small, nervous nod, refusing to make real eye contact. "The position reports directly to Julian," my father continued, shuffling some papers on his desk. "You will handle the IT implementation, the server maintenance, and whatever technical support the trading floor needs. It is an entry-level salary, but you will have a job and a 401k. You will learn the business from the basement up." I stared at him. My blood ran cold. IT support? Dad, I just graduated from Stanford with a master's in computational mathematics. My algorithms can predict market variance. I build predictive trading models. You want me to fix the printers and run cables for Julian? Nathaniel laughed. It was a harsh, scraping sound. "Listen to the kid. He reads a few books on the West Coast and thinks he's a portfolio manager. You should be down on your knees grateful your father is offering you a paycheck. Liam, you have zero real-world experience." "I am talking to my father, Nathaniel. I snapped. I turned back to Arthur. I have job offers from 2 major hedge funds in Manhattan. They want my predictive models. If I come work here, I want to build a quantitative division. I want to run my own algorithms. The temperature in the room dropped below freezing. My father leaned forward, his eyes turning to black ice. Julian earned his position. He understands loyalty. He didn't run off to California chasing foolish dreams on my dime. You will take the support role under your brother. You will do what you are told, or you will get nothing. Julian barely passed his undergraduate business classes, I said. The years of suppressed rage finally spilled over. The only reason he has a corner office is because his last name is Holloway. You want me to be a servant to your golden child so you can keep controlling both of us. You just want to keep me beneath him. Julian stood up, looking panicked. Liam, don't do this. Just take the job. Shut up, Julian, I said, my voice shaking with pure adrenaline. I looked at the man who had ignored me for 2 decades. You never wanted me. You just wanted an audience for your greatness. You wanted a punching bag. Well, keep your entry-level salary. Keep your toxic empire. I don't want a single penny of your money. My father stood up slowly. He walked around the massive mahogany desk until he was inches from my face. He smelled like expensive cigars and pure malice. You arrogant, worthless little boy. You think your math equations mean anything in the real world? You have no connections. You have no capital. You are absolutely nothing without my name. He pointed a rigid finger at the door. Get out of my house. You are no son of mine. Let's see how far your precious algorithms carry you when you are starving in the street. I turned and walked out. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't take any of the clothes he had bought me over the years. I just walked down the grand staircase, through the foyer, and out the front door into the freezing March wind. I walked for 3 miles along the dark, winding roads of Greenwich until I reached a brightly lit gas station. I checked my phone. I had exactly $84 in my checking account. My college fund was controlled by a trust one could not access. I was completely cut off. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was my mother. I answered it, shivering violently in the cold night air. Liam! She was sobbing softly. Liam, please apologize to him. Just come back and say you're sorry. He'll calm down. He'll forgive you. Mom, I'm at the gas station on Route 1. It's freezing out here. Can you just drive down here and bring me my heavy winter coat? Or maybe a few $100s, so I can get a motel room for the night. The line went dead silent. I only heard the sound of her jagged breathing. Mom! If I leave the house, if I help you right now, he will cut up my credit cards. He told me if I contact you, he will initiate a divorce tomorrow morning. He will hire the most vicious lawyer in New York and leave me with nothing. Her voice broke into a pathetic whimper. I'm sorry, Liam. I can't do it. She hung up the phone. I gripped the plastic casing of my phone until my knuckles turned white. My own mother. She chose her comfortable cage over her freezing sun. She chose her country club lunches and her allowance over my basic safety. That was the exact moment the last shred of the boy I was died. I promised myself right there on that frozen concrete that I would not just survive this. I was going to build a machine that would devour Arthur Holloway's entire world. I thought the worst part of the nightmare was over. I thought the betrayal was finished. I was so incredibly wrong. The first year away from Greenwich was a special kind of hell. I moved to New York City and crashed on a lumpy, stained couch in a cramped Brooklyn apartment. I shared a single bathroom with 3 other guys who worked construction and retail. I paid my meager share of the rent by working the brutal morning shift at a greasy diner in Midtown Manhattan. Every morning at 5, I was pouring cheap, burnt coffee for arrogant investment bankers who made more money in one morning than I would see in 5 years. I went home every day smelling like old grease, bacon, and pure exhaustion. At night, I worked a second job as a janitor at a high-end boutique hotel near Central Park. I scrubbed toilets used by the elite. I vacuumed carpets. I changed heavy linen sheets stained with things I do not even want to describe. I swallowed my pride every single day because I had a mission. I never stopped working on my algorithms. I used a beat-up, second-hand laptop that overheated every 30 minutes. I sat at a tiny folding table in the kitchen of my shared apartment and traded sleep for code. I was building a predictive financial model that integrated sentiment analysis, macroeconomic indicators, and real-time news feeds. It was highly complex, beautiful math. One night at the hotel, everything shifted. I was emptying the trash in a luxury business suite when I saw a thick stack of papers left casually on the mahogany desk. It was a highly complex research paper on variance modeling in algorithmic trading. I glanced at it, intending to throw it away, but the equations caught my eye. The math was fundamentally flawed. I could see the error in the core equation instantly. Without thinking, I took a pen from my pocket and corrected the formula right there on the desk. I wrote a quick note in the margin explaining exactly why their model would fail disastrously during a high-volatility market crash. The next night, the man renting the suite was waiting for me. His name was Victor. He was a brilliant, eccentric data scientist who advised massive tech funds and startups. He looked at me, a kid in a blue janitor's uniform holding a plastic trash bag, and demanded I explain the math I wrote. I did. I walked him through the entire predictive sequence. 10 minutes later, Victor offered me a job as a junior data analyst at his firm. The salary was low, barely enough to cover my Brooklyn rent, but the access to raw, real-time market data was exactly what I needed. I started testing my own predictive models using Victor's servers during the night. The results were terrifyingly accurate. I was predicting market movements days before they happened. Then, exactly when I thought I was finding my footing and building a real life, my family dragged me back into the dirt. My Uncle Simon, my father's younger brother, tracked me down. He waited outside the diner one afternoon at the end of my shift. Simon had always played the role of the friendly, easygoing uncle. He was the one who bought us ice cream when Dad was yelling. He took me to a nearby coffee shop. He looked at my worn-out shoes, my cheap jacket, and my exhausted, pale face with deep, convincing sympathy. "Liam, this is ridiculous," Simon said, sliding a thick white envelope across the table. "There's $500 in cash in there. Take it. Pay your rent. Get a decent, hot meal. Your father is a stubborn old fool, but he will cool down eventually. Just survive until he does. Don't let your pride kill you." I looked at the envelope. I was so desperate, so tired of eating instant ramen and freezing at night, that I actually felt hot tears sting my eyes. I thought I finally had one piece of family that actually cared about my survival. I thanked him profusely, sliding the envelope into the inside pocket of my jacket. I walked out of the coffee shop, feeling a strange sense of relief. But half a block down the street, I realized I had left my scarf draped over the back of my chair. I turned around and walked back inside. Simon was still sitting at the corner table. He had his phone pressed to his ear. He was laughing. "Arthur, you really should have seen him," Simon chuckled, his voice dripping with absolute malice. "He looks like a homeless person. He is literally scrubbing toilets and pouring coffee for tips. He took the $500 like a starving dog. It was pathetic. Give it another month. When winter really hits, he'll be crawling back to Greenwich begging you for that IT job." I froze in the doorway. My stomach plummeted to the floor. The friendly uncle routine was a trap. Simon was a spy, sent to gather material for my father's entertainment. They were treating my poverty, my struggle, and my pain like a spectator sport. I walked up to the table. Simon looked up, his face dropping in sheer panic. I pulled the envelope out of my pocket and dropped it directly into Simon's half-empty coffee mug. The thick paper soaked up the dark liquid instantly. "Tell Arthur he is going to need that money a lot more than I do," I said quietly. I walked out and never looked back. That betrayal flipped a permanent switch in my brain. It was no longer just about survival. It was no longer just about proving them wrong. It was about absolute, total annihilation. I took my algorithms to Sophia. Sophia was a former hedge fund manager who had been brutally pushed out of her firm by old, toxic men exactly like my father. She was brilliant, angry, and looking for a comeback. She reviewed my code. She ran it through rigorous stress tests against the 2008 market crash data. When the simulation finished, her hands were actually shaking. "Liam," she whispered, staring at the screen. "This doesn't just predict the market. It reads the collective psychology of the market before the market even knows what it's doing. If we launch this, we will destroy the competition." We launched GH Venture in absolute secrecy. I refused to put my name on any public filings. We used a massive labyrinth of shell companies, legal trusts, and ironclad non-disclosure agreements. As far as the outside world was concerned, GH Venture was a ghost ship run by a nameless European syndicate. We started with $3 million of angel investment from people Sophia trusted. Within 18 months, my algorithm generated returns that made Wall Street veterans feel physically sick. While traditional funds panicked over global supply chain disruptions and interest rate hikes, my model saw the patterns weeks in advance. We shorted the exact right sectors. We didn't just beat the market. We broke it. By my 30th birthday, GH Venture crossed $500 million in assets under management. I moved out of Brooklyn and into a discreet, highly secure penthouse. I had more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I drove a normal car. I wore normal clothes. The wealth was not the goal. The power was the goal. And then, the universe handed me the ultimate gift on a silver platter. The storm was finally coming for Arthur Holloway. The call came on a dark, rainy Tuesday in November. I was sitting in my office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Sophia walked in, shutting the heavy glass door securely behind her. She looked serious, but there was a dangerous, triumphant spark in her eyes. "Richard Vance wants a meeting," she said. Richard Vance was the chairman of Reed Capital. He was the undisputed king of institutional banking in New York. If Reed Capital backed your fund, you were virtually untouchable. You had access to sovereign wealth funds and massive pension accounts. But Richard Vance was also notoriously aggressive. He had been digging into GH Venture for months, obsessed with finding out who was behind the impossible, logic-defying returns we were generating. "He found a paper trail," Sophia explained, sitting across from my desk. "He hired private investigators who managed to trace a series of complex offshore transactions back to one of our primary holding companies. He knows you are the architect, Liam. He requested a private meeting. Just you and him. Today." I met Richard in a private, mahogany-paneled room at an exclusive members-only club in Tribeca. He was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He ordered a scotch and didn't waste any time with small talk. "I have been in this cutthroat business for 40 years, Richard said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I have seen absolute prodigies burn out, and I have seen brilliant frauds go to federal prison. But your algorithms, Liam, they are a different species entirely. Reed Capital wants to provide institutional backing for GH Venture. We want to take your operations global." I studied him carefully. "Why the sudden rush, Richard? We are highly profitable without your distribution network." He leaned back against the leather chair, a predatory smile crossing his weathered face. "Because I have a high-profile client who is currently bleeding out on my conference room floor. He is begging for a technological miracle, and you are the only man in this city who holds the patent to the medicine he desperately needs." "Who is the client?" I asked, though I already felt the answer settling deep in my bones. "Holloway Securities," Richard said smoothly. The air in the room seemed to completely vanish. I kept my face entirely neutral. I did not blink, but my heart was slamming against my ribs with the force of a freight train. Arthur Holloway overleveraged his firm on a catastrophic, ego-driven expansion into the London market, Richard explained, completely unaware of my blood relation to the man. His traditional trading models are archaic. They are losing millions every week. He is hemorrhaging capital. His board of directors is threatening to remove him and strip him of his equity. He came to me yesterday begging for a massive capital injection and a strategic partnership. Specifically, he wants access to the technology that GH Venture possesses. He firmly believes it is the only thing that will save his legacy and stop the collapse of his stock. The irony was so thick I could practically choke on it. My father, the man who told me my math was a foolish dream, the man who kicked me out into the snow to starve, was now on his knees begging the banking world for the exact algorithms I built in a rat-infested apartment. He was begging for the product of the son he threw away. "Are you going to give it to him?" I asked quietly, my voice betraying nothing. "That is entirely up to you," Richard replied. "If Reed Capital partners with you, we control the licensing. We can mandate that Holloway Securities uses your platform. If you say no, Holloway Securities will be completely bankrupt by the end of the fiscal quarter. Arthur will lose his firm, his mansions, his reputation. Everything." Before I could answer him and set the final stage, an unexpected threat emerged from the shadows of my own company. A week later, Elias, one of our earliest angel investors, stormed past my assistant and into my office. Elias was a greedy, constantly sweating man who had recently lost millions in a terrible commercial real estate deal. He slammed a manila folder onto my desk. "I know exactly who you are, Liam," Elias sneered, his face red with desperation and anger. "I hired a guy to do some digging into your background. You're Arthur Holloway's estranged kid, the one he publicly disowned 7 years ago." I stood up slowly, buttoning my suit jacket. "What do you want, Elias?" "I want $50 million wired to my account by Friday," he demanded, pointing a thick finger at me. "Or I call Arthur right now. I tell him his worthless son is the billionaire holding the keys to his salvation. Arthur is a ruthless, vicious man, Liam. If he finds out, he will unleash an army of lawyers. He will tie you up in lawsuits for decades. He will claim your initial IP was developed using his resources while you lived under his roof. He will do whatever it takes to take it from you. Pay me, or your little revenge fantasy dies today." I didn't say a single word. I picked up my phone and pressed a single speed dial button. "Richard," I said calmly into the receiver. "Elias is in my office. He's threatening extortion regarding the Holloway matter." I put the phone on speaker and set it on the desk. Richard Vance's voice echoed through the room, as cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "Elias," Richard said softly, "you are currently holding a massive margin loan with Reed Capital for your failing real estate investments. If you speak one single word of Liam's identity to anyone, I will call in your loan in exactly 60 seconds. I will seize your properties, freeze your bank accounts, and bury you in so much aggressive litigation that your grandchildren will be paying off the legal fees. You will be utterly ruined. Do you understand me?" Elias went completely pale. The color drained from his face as if he had seen a ghost. He backed away from my desk, his hands trembling violently. He turned and practically ran out of the office without saying another word. I picked up the phone. "Thank you, Richard." "My pleasure," Richard replied. "So, about Arthur Holloway. What is the play?" I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window of my penthouse, staring down at the massive, sprawling Manhattan skyline. The city looked like a grid of endless possibilities. "Arthur is hosting his annual Christmas dinner next week at the Skyline Sovereign Club. He uses it to flaunt his power to his investors. Tell him Reed Capital agrees to the partnership. Tell him you are coming to the dinner personally to announce it to his inner circle." "And the technology?" Richard asked. "Tell him the founder of GH Venture will be there in person to sign the rights over," I said, a cold, hard smile spreading across my face. The trap was fully set. The explosive was wired. All I had to do was walk into that dining room, look my father in the eye, and press the detonator. The atmosphere inside the private dining room of the Skyline Sovereign Club was thick with the scent of roasted duck, expensive truffles, and the absolute, suffocating arrogance of Wall Street's elite. I sat at the far end of the incredibly long mahogany table, completely ignored by the people who shared my DNA, and watched my father orchestrate his grand, desperate illusion. This was not just a simple Christmas dinner. This was a carefully staged theatrical performance designed to save his life. Arthur Holloway was using this holiday gathering to project absolute financial invincibility to his most critical investors, his nervous board members, and his sycophantic friends. He desperately needed them to believe that Holloway Securities was stronger than ever. He was completely masking the reality that his firm was bleeding out from catastrophic commercial real estate investments and a deeply flawed international expansion strategy. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, my eyes tracking every single movement in the massive room. The waiter cleared our plates with practiced, silent efficiency. The low murmur of wealthy people discussing their massive investment portfolios, their upcoming winter vacations in Aspen, and their latest luxury acquisitions filled the space. Nobody was talking about the massive, looming threat of bankruptcy. Nobody was mentioning the impending lawsuits from angry shareholders who were watching their dividends vanish. They were entirely captivated by the illusion Arthur had meticulously built over the past 3 decades. My older brother, Julian, sat 3 seats away from my father. Julian looked like a man standing on the extreme edge of a high cliff. He was drinking his scotch entirely too fast. His wife, Clara, sat next to him, her posture completely rigid. Her eyes constantly darted toward the heavy wooden door, as if she was calculating the exact moment she could escape this nightmare. I knew their marriage was falling apart rapidly. I knew Julian was crumbling under the unbearable weight of being the golden child, forced to prop up our father's failing empire while taking the blame for every corporate misstep. Clara had already consulted a lawyer about a potential divorce and full custody of their 2 children. The tension radiating from them was palpable. My mother, Margaret, sat quietly near my father. She offered polite, hollow smiles to the heavily jeweled wives of the executives. She looked exactly like a fragile bird trapped in a gilded cage, terrified to make a single sound or sudden movement that might upset the warden. Her entire existence was tied to her monthly allowance and the social standing her marriage provided. My father suddenly picked up a silver spoon and tapped his crystal champagne flute. The sharp, high-pitched ringing cut through the chatter instantly. The room fell into a reverent, obedient silence. Every eye turned to Arthur. He stood up slowly, buttoning his tailored Italian suit jacket. He projected the flawless image of a fearless captain steering a massive, unsinkable ship. Family, friends, and esteemed partners, Arthur began. His voice dropped into that familiar, commanding baritone that he used to close multi-million-dollar deals and intimidate rivals. I want to sincerely thank you all for gathering here tonight. Christmas is a time for reflection. It is a time to appreciate the incredible legacy we have built together, and more importantly, it is a time to look forward toward the horizon. As many of you know, the market has been highly unpredictable this year. We have navigated some incredibly turbulent waters. We have watched some of our competitors fold under the pressure. We have watched weaker men panic. He paused, offering a confident, dismissive chuckle. The executives around the table chuckled right on cue, eager to please the boss. But Holloway Securities does not panic, Arthur continued, leaning his hands heavily on the polished wood of the table. We adapt. We conquer. I am incredibly proud to announce to you all tonight that we are entering a new, dominant era. We have spent the last few months quietly negotiating a monumental strategic partnership. By the end of this week, Holloway Securities will officially join forces with Reed Capital. A loud murmur of genuine awe rippled through the room. Several people clapped politely. Partnering with Reed Capital was the absolute holy grail of high finance in New York City. It was the ultimate validation. Arthur soaked in their admiration, his chest puffing out with sheer pride. He fed on their approval like a starving man. With Reed Capital's immense institutional backing, we are acquiring the exclusive licensing rights to the most advanced, revolutionary algorithmic trading technology on the planet, Arthur boasted, his eyes gleaming with unchecked greed. This highly guarded technology is going to fully automate our quantitative division. It will predict market variance with unprecedented accuracy. It is going to render our competitors entirely obsolete. The future of this firm is secured for generations to come. My legacy will outlive us all. He raised his glass high in the air, The entire room followed suit, raising their crystal flutes. To legacy, to supreme power, to the absolute future. They drank. I simply sat there and watched him. I watched a man build a magnificent, towering castle out of thin air, completely unaware that I was holding the match that would burn it to the ground. As the applause died down and people took their seats, Arthur's eyes scanned the length of the table. They locked directly onto me. The warmth vanished from his face instantly, replaced by that cold, familiar sneer. He was riding high on his own inflated ego, and like an addict, he needed another quick hit. He needed to assert his absolute dominance in front of his peers. He needed a punching bag to prove his superiority. And there I was, the prodigal son sitting quietly at the end of the table in a cheap suit. "Of course," Arthur said, his voice carrying a dangerous, mocking edge that made the room grow uncomfortably quiet. "Not everyone understands what it takes to build a lasting legacy. Not everyone has the stomach or the intellect for this level of extreme success." The executives shifted nervously in their seats. Julian stared down at his empty scotch glass, his jaw clenching tight enough to crack a tooth. My mother closed her eyes for a brief second, bracing her body for the inevitable impact. Arthur walked slowly down the length of the table toward me. "Look at my youngest son, Liam. I gave him every single opportunity in the world. He grew up in a multimillion-dollar mansion. He had his college fund fully loaded. I even offered him a guaranteed salary and a highly secure job at my firm. I handed him a career on a silver platter. But Liam thought he was significantly smarter than all of us. He thought his little math equations and his cute computer programs were going to change the world without putting in the actual hard work that business requires." He stopped just a few feet away from my chair. "I told him 7 years ago that dreams do not pay the mortgage. I told him that arrogance without capital is just pure stupidity. And what exactly happened? He walked out. He threw away his family. He threw away a massive inheritance out of sheer, foolish pride." Arthur gestured widely toward my off-the-rack suit with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "And now look at him, 32 years old, sitting at the adults' table, contributing absolutely nothing to the world. Tell me, Liam, when you are pouring coffee for your bosses, or whatever menial labor you do to afford that cheap jacket, do you ever deeply regret your foolish choices? Do you ever wish you had just swallowed your pride and listened to your father?" I looked up at him. The sheer audacity of his delusion was almost beautiful to witness. He was so completely blinded by his own narcissism that he could not sense the massive predator standing right behind him in the tall grass. "I do not regret a single choice I made, Arthur," I said. My voice was perfectly calm and completely even. I did not raise my tone. I did not show an ounce of the rage that used to consume me when I was younger. Every single step I took after leaving your house was absolutely necessary. It led me exactly where I needed to be. Arthur let out a sharp, patronizing laugh that echoed loudly. "Listen to that. The stubborn, ridiculous pride of a complete failure. It is almost tragic. You see, everyone, this is what happens when you refuse to respect the natural hierarchy of business. You end up with an empty wallet and a head full of totally useless pride." He turned his back on me, walking back toward the head of the table like a victorious Roman gladiator accepting the cheers of the crowd. "But enough about past family disappointments. Tonight is about the future. Tonight is about the brilliant minds who actually understand how to generate real wealth." Right at that exact second, the heavy oak double doors of the private dining room swung wide open. The maitre d' quickly stepped aside, and Richard Vance walked into the room. Richard was flanked by 2 of his senior legal partners. He wore a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal gray suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. He radiated the kind of quiet, terrifying power that made even billionaires nervous. The moment Richard entered, the entire dynamic of the room shifted violently. My father's arrogant posture instantly melted into eager, almost desperate submission. He practically sprinted across the thick carpet to shake Richard's hand. "Richard, my good friend," Arthur beamed. pumping the powerful banker's hand enthusiastically. "We were just talking about you. I was just telling my partners and my family about the monumental deal we are finalizing this week. Please come in. Have some vintage champagne. The floor is entirely yours." Richard did not smile. He did not accept a glass of champagne from the waiter. He looked at Arthur with the cold, highly detached expression of a surgeon about to deliver a terminal diagnosis. "Arthur," Richard said, his voice echoing loudly and clearly in the quiet room. "I apologize for interrupting your private family dinner, but there has been a slight alteration to our arrangement. A rather significant development regarding the technology acquisition." Arthur's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered his composure. "A development? Well, whatever the legal teams need to iron out, I am absolutely sure we can handle it smoothly in the morning. We are fully committed to this partnership, Richard. We need that algorithm to push forward." "Yes, you desperately do," Richard agreed smoothly, stepping further into the room. "Your firm is facing critical insolvency within the next 90 days if you do not immediately implement this exact technology. You need it to survive the upcoming audits and the impending shareholder lawsuit that is currently being drafted. I believe we all understand the severe stakes here." A collective gasp swept through the room. The high-level executives at the table looked at each other in sheer panic. Arthur had lied to them directly to their faces. He had completely hidden the massive financial distress of the company. Now, the highly respected chairman of Reed Capital was exposing his impending bankruptcy in front of everyone. Arthur's face turned a sickening shade of gray. "Richard, please, I beg you, this is a private family event. We can discuss the operational and financial details at the office tomorrow." "This is not an operational detail, Arthur," Richard interrupted. His voice hardened into solid steel. "This is a matter of legal ownership. You see, Reed Capital does not own the algorithm you are so desperate to acquire. We simply represent the fund that built it. We represent GH Venture." Yes, I know," Arthur said quickly, his voice rising in pitch as he desperately tried to regain control of the narrative. "And I have immense, profound respect for the founder of GH Venture. Whoever he is, the man is an absolute mathematical genius. His predictive models are flawless. I am entirely willing to pay whatever premium he demands to license the software. Just tell me his price. Tell me what he wants." Richard Vance finally smiled. It was not a kind smile. "The founder of GH Venture does not want your money, Arthur. He already has significantly more money than your entire firm is currently worth. And he is not a nameless European syndicate. The architect of the algorithm, the sole legal owner of the intellectual property you are currently begging for, is sitting right here in this room." Arthur froze completely. His eyes darted frantically around the table, looking at his wealthy friends, his confused executives, actively searching for a hidden billionaire among them. Richard Vance slowly raised his hand and pointed directly across the length of the long mahogany table. He pointed straight at me. "Arthur Holloway, allow me to formally introduce the billionaire founder of GH Venture," Richard said, his voice ringing with absolute, crushing finality. "Your son, Liam." The silence that immediately fell over the massive dining room was not just quiet. It was a heavy, suffocating vacuum. It was the exact kind of silence that happens right after a bomb goes off, in that split second before the debris even hits the ground. Every single person at that long mahogany table stopped breathing. The highly trained waiters standing near the walls froze like marble statues. My father stood entirely paralyzed in the center of the room. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a freshly embalmed corpse. His jaw went completely slack. He looked at Richard Vance, and then he slowly, mechanically turned his head to look down the length of the table at me. His eyes were wide with a highly volatile mixture of profound shock, utter disbelief, and the terrifying, dawning realization that his entire reality was collapsing around him. "No," Arthur whispered. The word barely made it past his dry lips. "No, that is a joke. That is mathematically impossible. Richard, this is some kind of sick, elaborate prank. Liam is a nobody. He has absolutely no capital. He has no connections in this industry. He works in a diner pouring coffee. He worked in a diner 7 years ago, Arthur, Richard corrected him, his tone brutally professional and completely void of sympathy. He used that difficult time to build a predictive financial model that currently manages over $1 billion in global assets. I have personally reviewed the legal documents, the patents, the shell companies, and the audited financial statements. Liam Holloway is the sole architect and majority shareholder of GH Venture. He is the man holding the absolute keys to your survival. I stood up from my chair at the end of the table. I buttoned my off-the-rack dark suit jacket with slow, deliberate precision. I did not rush the moment. I had waited 7 years, 3 months, and 14 days for this exact confrontation. I wanted to feel every single second of it burn into his memory. I walked slowly down the length of the table. The executives who had been laughing at me and pitying me just 10 minutes ago now pressed themselves firmly back into their plush chairs. They looked at me with a potent mixture of deep awe and absolute terror. I was no longer the stray dog of the Holloway family. I was the executioner holding the axe. I stopped directly in front of my father. He was actually trembling. The great Arthur Holloway, the feared Wall Street titan who ruled his family and his employees with an iron fist, was physically shaking in his expensive Italian shoes. "You told me my math was totally useless," I said. My voice was low, cutting through the dead silence of the room like a razor blade. "You told me I was incredibly arrogant. You told me that I would be starving in the street without your last name to protect me." Arthur opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stared at me, his eyes darting frantically, desperately searching for a way out of the massive trap that had just slammed shut on his neck. "While you were busy making catastrophic commercial real estate investments and illegally hiding your massive losses from your own board of directors," I continued, making absolutely sure my voice carried to every single executive sitting at the table, "I was writing the code that completely broke the market. While you were heavily leveraging your firm into massive, unmanageable debt just to feed your fragile ego, I was building an empire in absolute silence. You wanted the technology of GH Venture to magically save your legacy? The technology you need exists solely because you threw me out into the freezing snow." My mother let out a sharp, strangled sob from her chair. She pressed both of her hands tightly over her mouth, tears streaming rapidly down her face. She stared at me as if she was seeing a ghost completely come back to life. Julian stood frozen by the floor-to-ceiling window, his eyes wide, his mouth hanging slightly open in pure shock. "Liam," Arthur finally choked out. His voice was incredibly raspy, completely stripped of its usual commanding boom. He swallowed hard and tried to force a warm smile onto his face. It was the most pathetic, grotesque expression I had ever seen a human being make. "Liam, my boy, my son. I always knew you had incredible potential. I pushed you hard because I knew you needed it to survive in this cutthroat world. It was tough love. I wanted you to prove me wrong. I wanted you to fight back." The sheer, staggering narcissism of the man was breathtaking. Even now, completely cornered, with his financial empire actively crumbling around him, he was actively trying to claim credit for my massive success. He was trying to rewrite history in front of a live audience. I let out a cold, extremely sharp laugh. "Tough love? Is that what we are calling it now? Is it tough love to deliberately leave your son to freeze in the street with $80 in his checking account? Is it tough love to send Uncle Simon to actively spy on me while I scrubbed hotel toilets at 2 a.m., just so you could laugh about my intense poverty over your morning coffee?" Uncle Simon, who was sitting near the center of the table trying to make himself look as small as possible, suddenly went completely rigid. Several executives turned to look at him with deep, visible disgust. "You did not push me to succeed, Arthur," I said, stepping 1 inch closer to him, forcing him to look me directly in the eye. "You actively tried to break me. You wanted me to fail spectacularly so you could point at my corpse and say, 'Look what happens when you disobey the king.' You wanted me to crawl back to Greenwich and beg for a job fixing printers for Julian so you could completely own me forever. I turned away from him slightly to look at the board members and senior executives sitting at the table. They hung on my every word. "My father lied to you all tonight," I stated clearly. "He told you this partnership with Reed Capital was a massive strategic victory. It is not. It is a desperate, last-minute bailout. Holloway Securities is facing total insolvency. He is facing an impending SEC audit. His London expansion was a complete, unmitigated failure. He came to Reed Capital begging for a lifeline to stop the bleeding." I turned back to Arthur. He looked incredibly small. For the first time in my entire life, looking at the man who had terrified me for 2 full decades, I saw nothing but a weak, pathetic old man who had finally run out of lies and leverage. "And here is the absolute best part, Arthur," I whispered. I leaned in so only he and Richard could hear clearly, though the room was quiet enough that the words echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "I own the technology. I completely control the licensing agreements, which means I am the one who gets to decide if Holloway Securities lives or dies tonight." Arthur's knees actually buckled slightly. He reached out blindly and gripped the thick edge of the dining table to keep himself from collapsing to the floor. "Liam, please. I am begging you. This is your family's legacy. This is your grandfather's firm. You cannot destroy it." "I am not destroying it," I replied coldly. "You destroyed it years ago. I am just the man holding the shovel for the grave. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Now, let me tell you exactly how I established the New World Order, how my brother finally broke his chains, and the shocking secret my mother revealed that changed everything I thought I knew about the night I was thrown away. Arthur Holloway was a completely cornered animal. He looked wildly around the room, slowly realizing that his wealthy friends, his loyal executives, and his incredibly strict board members were actively watching his absolute humiliation. His pristine reputation, the only thing he truly valued in this world, was being shredded to pieces on the expensive carpet of his own private dinner party. He tried one last, desperate tactic. He tried to use the crushing weight of paternal authority. "You listen to me right now, Liam," Arthur snarled. His face suddenly flushed dark red with extreme rage. He forcibly straightened his posture, trying to summon the ghost of his former power. "I am your father. I am the CEO of this firm. You will sign over the licensing rights to Holloway Securities immediately, or I will tie you up in aggressive litigation for the next 20 years. I will hire the best lawyers in Manhattan to prove you built that algorithm using my resources and my intellectual property while you lived under my roof. I will take it from you." Before I could even formulate a response to that incredibly pathetic legal threat, another voice cut through the heavy air of the room. "No, you won't." Everyone turned their heads. It was Julian. My older brother, the absolute golden child, the perfect heir who had never raised his voice to our father in his entire 35 years of life, stepped away from the window. Julian walked purposefully toward the table. His hands were shaking visibly, but his eyes were entirely clear. He looked exactly like a man who was finally waking up from a 20-year coma. "Julian, stay out of this," Arthur snapped viciously. "This is strictly between me and your brother. I am the chief operating officer of this firm, Dad," Julian said. His voice gained immense strength with every single word he spoke. "And I am telling you right now, it is completely over. I am done lying for you. I am done hiding the disastrous financial reports from the board. I am done pretending that your London strategy wasn't a complete, bankrupting disaster. You have driven this family and this company into the ground just to feed your own massive ego." "How dare you speak to me that way?" Arthur roared, violently slamming his fist on the mahogany table. "I built your entire life. I gave you everything. You are absolutely nothing without me. You gave me a cage," Julian shouted back, his voice breaking with years of suppressed agony and pure exhaustion. You controlled my career. You heavily controlled my marriage. You made me watch you mentally abuse Liam for years, and you made me too terrified to defend him. Clara is consulting a lawyer and filing for divorce because she can't stand watching me be your obedient puppet anymore. She is going to demand full custody of my kids. I lost my soul trying to be your perfect son. Clara, who was sitting frozen at the table, suddenly stood up. She walked quickly over and stood right next to Julian, grabbing his hand tightly. It was the first time in years I had seen them present a united front. The threat of a ruined family was finally uniting them against the true source of the poison. Arthur looked at Julian, then at Clara, then back to me. His empire was not just crumbling financially. His entire bloodline was actively revolting against him in real time. My mother, Margaret, finally stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the polished floor. She was shaking violently, crying freely, completely ruining her expensive makeup. She didn't look at Arthur. She walked entirely around the massive table, completely ignoring the shocked stares of the executives. She walked straight up to me and grabbed my arm tightly, sobbing heavily into my shoulder. I stood there, letting her hold on to me, feeling the fragile weight of a woman who had been broken a very long time ago. I am setting the terms, I said. My voice echoed over my mother's quiet sobbing. I looked directly into Arthur's defeated eyes. Holloway Securities needs a massive bailout. I will provide the capital injection through GH Venture, and I will grant exclusive licensing of my predictive algorithms to the firm. But I have two absolutely non-negotiable conditions. The board members sitting at the table leaned in closer, hanging on my every single word. Condition 1, I stated firmly. Arthur Holloway resigns as CEO, effective tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. He immediately steps down from the board of directors. He relinquishes all voting rights. He retires permanently. He will have zero operational control over this firm ever again. Arthur gasped loudly, grabbing his chest as if I had physically stabbed him. You cannot do that. The board will never approve such a demand. The board will absolutely approve, Richard Vance interrupted smoothly from the sidelines. In fact, I have already discussed this exact contingency with your 3 largest shareholders this afternoon. They are fully prepared to aggressively force you out if you do not resign gracefully tonight, Arthur. Liam's generous deal is the only thing keeping them from filing severe criminal negligence charges against you. Arthur looked like he was going to be physically sick. Condition 2, I continued, turning my gaze to my brother. Julian Holloway officially takes over as CEO. But he does not answer to Arthur. He answers to the board of directors and he answers to the data. I will personally oversee the quantitative transition. Julian looked at me, completely stunned. Liam, you actually want me to run it? You actually care about the employees, Julian? I said honestly. You spent the last 5 years desperately trying to clean up his massive mistakes behind the scenes. You know exactly how the firm operates. You just needed the tyrant completely out of the way so you could actually lead. Now is your chance. I looked back at Arthur. He was utterly defeated. The fight had completely left his body. He slumped heavily into the nearest empty chair, putting his head in his hands. The great Wall Street titan was reduced to a weeping, broken old man who had lost his company, his family, and his supreme power in the span of 20 minutes. You have exactly until tomorrow morning to sign the resignation papers, Arthur, I said coldly. If you refuse, I completely pull the deal. Reed Capital legally calls in your massive debts, and you go completely bankrupt by Friday. I gently detached myself from my mother's tight grip. I looked around the room at the silent, stunned faces of the Manhattan elite. I adjusted my cheap suit jacket. Merry Christmas, everyone, I said. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I didn't look back once. I walked through the crystal-dripping lobby, past the string quartet, and out the heavy glass doors into the freezing New York night. The cold air hit my face, and for the first time in 7 years, I took a deep, full breath. I was entirely, completely free. 6 months later, the chaotic dust had finally settled. Arthur signed the official resignation papers the morning after the Christmas dinner. He didn't put up a fight. He didn't have the leverage, the energy, or the capital to wage a massive legal war against Reed Capital and GH Venture. He quietly packed his office and retreated to the massive Greenwich mansion. The board permanently stripped him of his title, and his close friends on Wall Street completely stopped returning his phone calls overnight. Without his immense corporate power, Arthur Holloway was just an angry, heavily isolated old man sitting in an empty house. Julian officially took over as CEO of Holloway Securities. The transition was brutal at first, but with my predictive algorithms guiding the quantitative trading division, the firm quickly stabilized. Within 4 short months, they were highly profitable again. More importantly, Julian completely changed the toxic culture. He fired Nathaniel and the other useless sycophants. He actually started spending weekends with Clara and his kids instead of working himself into the ground to please a ghost. He was healing. Clara canceled the meetings with her lawyer. The divorce was officially off the table. On a beautifully warm afternoon in June, I met my mother for lunch at a quiet, highly private cafe in Central Park. She looked completely different. She had filed for legal separation from Arthur. She moved out of the suffocating Greenwich estate and bought a beautiful, sunlit condo in the city using her own inheritance. The crushing, constant anxiety that used to dictate her every movement was entirely gone. She looked 10 years younger. We ordered coffee, and she reached into her expensive designer purse. She pulled out a small, yellowed envelope and slid it slowly across the table to me. "I desperately wanted to give this to you 7 years ago," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I kept it carefully hidden in a lockbox." I opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check made out to me for $50,000. It was dated the exact week my father kicked me out into the snow. "I tried to find a secure way to get it to you," Margaret said, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "But Arthur had hired a vicious private investigator to closely monitor my bank accounts and my movements. If he caught me helping you, he would have destroyed both of us. He would have left me destitute. I was a coward, Liam. I am so deeply, truly sorry." I looked down at the check. $50,000 would have entirely changed my life back then. It would have meant I didn't have to scrub toilets or eat garbage from the diner. But holding it now as a self-made billionaire, I realized something profoundly important. If I had easily received this money, I might have just lived a comfortable, quiet, mediocre life. I would never have been pushed to the absolute brink of survival. I would never have been forced to build GH Venture. The extreme trauma was the intense crucible that forged the empire. "It's entirely okay, Mom," I said gently, pushing the check back toward her across the table. "I really don't need it anymore. You keep it." She smiled, a sad, incredibly knowing smile. "There is something else you really should know, Liam, about your father's massive downfall, about the SEC audit that almost completely destroyed him before you bought the firm." I looked at her, highly confused. Arthur's London expansion failed because of bad market data and terrible management. "No," Margaret said quietly, leaning forward so no one else could hear. "Arthur's expansion failed because someone completely anonymously mailed a massive box of his internal, highly falsified accounting records to the Securities and Exchange Commission, and secretly leaked the massive financial discrepancies to the board of directors." I stared at my mother in pure shock. This quiet, deeply passive woman who I truly thought had completely surrendered her entire soul to a tyrant. "You," I whispered, my eyes wide. She took a slow sip of her tea, her eyes flashing with a sudden, fierce, protective steel I had never seen in her before. "He threw my youngest son out into the freezing snow. He thought I was incredibly stupid. He thought I didn't pay close attention to the highly confidential documents he carelessly left on his desk at home. I couldn't protect you that night, Liam. I didn't have the strength. But I spent the last 7 years quietly copying every single illegal transaction he made. I patiently pulled the trigger the exact moment I had enough hard evidence to ensure the board would instantly turn on him. A massive chill ran heavily down my spine. The ultimate, crushing betrayal that brought Arthur Holloway to his knees didn't just come from me. It came directly from the woman he truly thought he owned completely. We actively destroyed his empire from both sides. I walked out of the cafe that afternoon feeling a profound, heavy sense of permanent closure. I went back to my penthouse and stood by the massive glass windows, looking out over the sprawling, beautiful city of New York. For 7 long years, pure revenge was the absolute only fuel in my engine. Kept me warm when I was literally freezing. Kept me awake when I was exhausted. I desperately wanted to see my father broken, publicly humiliated, and violently stripped of everything he loved. And I got exactly what I wanted. But standing there, watching the beautiful sunset reflect brightly off the glass towers, I realized the ultimate, profound truth about revenge. Destroying Arthur Holloway didn't magically heal my deep trauma. It was highly satisfying, yes, but it didn't fill the void in my chest. What actually healed me was the difficult process of building my own worth from scratch. What healed me was saving my older brother from a highly toxic cycle. What healed me was seeing my mother finally find her incredible courage. True revenge isn't about actively destroying the people who deeply hurt you. It is about outgrowing them so completely that their opinions, their power, and their mere existence no longer have any impact on your daily reality. I didn't just aggressively take my father's company. I took my entire life back. And absolutely nobody will ever take it from me again. Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own family? Have you ever had to permanently cut ties with deeply toxic parents to aggressively protect your own sanity? Or found massive success when everyone loudly told you that you would fail? Share your personal story in the comments below. I actively read every single one, and we are aggressively building a strong community of survivors here. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next incredible journey. Until next time, stay strong, build your own massive empire, and never let anyone strictly determine your true worth.